You're listening to Margins of Meaning with John Wilson. Margins of Meaning accepts zero responsibility for remakes, delaminations, fractures, open contacts, poor scans, missing opposings, unindexed bites, or any outcome that went sideways because someone decided the case could speak for itself and didn't pick up the phone. Anything I say on this show is just my opinion. It's not gospel. It's not CE. It's not legal advice, and it definitely may induce emotional damage. If you choose to listen to anything discussed here today, you do so at your own risk, preferably with a full night's sleep, sharp burrs, and a clinician who actually understands that silence is not a communication strategy. Also, if you've been in this trade for more than 5 years and you're still letting incomplete records just happen to you without saying a word, this one is for you. Pull up a chair, but listen at your own risk. Thank you. Welcome back to Margins of Meaning. I'm John Wilson, and this is episode 15. And I'm so glad that you're here. I've owed you this particular episode since maybe episode 9, maybe even longer than that. Honestly, if you've been with the show since the very beginning, you know how I feel about the phone. About real communication, the hard conversations, the call you keep finding reasons not to make. Well, that's been sitting underneath almost every story that I've told so far. Today, we're going to pull it all the way back up because everything this show has been building towards, the standard, the records, the call you keep avoiding, it all lives or dies on one thing. And it's really just your willingness to be heard. But I'm not going to start with a framework. I'm going to start with a life lesson. And the lesson is this. Never tell a friend you can fix their smile. I mean that. Write that down. Tape it somewhere. Because I learned it the hard way. And it was over a golf game with some buddies and maybe a few adult beverages, but it cost me something that I didn't really understand. It was more than just financial. It was more emotional. It was more in loss of sleep. Now, here's the thing about that lesson. I'd do it all over again, every single time, because the way it played out, the chaos, the hard calls, the silence on that phone, that second implant, the final restoration, all of it taught me something about communication that I couldn't have learned any other way. And underneath all of it is the same truth that I've been circling since episode 1. The truth is good, and people worth working with already know it. All right, guys, let's get into it. So I have this friend. He's a golfing buddy of mine, neighbor, really good man. And one day, somewhere between the back 9 and the 19th hole, I looked at him. And I couldn't stop looking at him. You know, he had this crown on this front tooth that was just drawing me in. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm generally a pretty private person when it comes to this. I try not to walk around evaluating people's dentistry. I certainly don't sit across them at dinner and catalog their occlusion. That's just not who I am. And to be honest, is not a real healthy path to any type of good friendships. But guys, this crown, oh my God, it was bad. And something in me, call it the 40 years of the craft or probably the adult beverages or this moment of pure hubris, I don't know. I just couldn't let it sit there. So I said it, told him straight out. Said I could help him. I said I could improve his smile. And he thought about it for a while, you know, the way that people do when you put something in their head that they can't unhear. Then he asked for a referral. So I sent him to one of my local clients, a genuinely talented clinician, and more importantly, a really good man. And we got right to work. You know, we cut off that old PFM, prepped it for an all ceramic. My friend came to the lab for a custom shade. And, that experience alone is wonderful because it just allows them to understand what goes into making these restorations and what's going to be going into their own mouth. Makes them connect with the craft in a deep way that not all people that get involved with dentistry get to have. That case was produced, it seated perfectly, and that's really where the story should have just ended. But guys, it didn't end there. You know, unfortunately, that tooth became infected. They tried to do an apical on it. The root canal failed, and ultimately they lost the tooth. And this is where the fun started. So now I'm involved in a way that I never planned to be. I go back to this same client. I ask for everything that I could use to plan a really nice surgery for him. Do a nice surgical guide, an immediate load temp, get the design ready for the final restoration. I'd do it right. We'd plan this case out and the client places the implant and sends me the scan, and immediately I see the challenge. The implant isn't placed deep enough. That position is wrong. Somehow the guide is not right. And that restoration I'd promised my friend, that outcome that I put my name on the moment I opened my mouth, well, it's not possible from where this implant sits. So guys, now I have 2 calls to make. And the first call is to the doctor. And to be honest, guys, that call is, as uncomfortable as it is, it was actually the easier one. Because it was definitive. It was clinical. The client was doing this case as a personal favor to me. It wasn't free on my end. And by the time everything unfolded, I think I was sitting on maybe $6,000 in fees trying to honor something that I had promised. That's what happens when you stick your nose somewhere where it shouldn't go. But guys, I made that call. I said what I saw. I said that the implant would need to come out and be replaced. And to this clinician's enormous credit, this is what real partners look like. Well, they just accepted it. They owned their part. They were willing to do what was right, even though it was super difficult and expensive and, more importantly, really embarrassing. Guys, that's not common. And I really want you to hear that, because that response is not common. And I'll come back to that, to why that really matters. The second call was to my friend, and this call was exceptionally harder because it wasn't a clinical relationship at this point. It was about trust, personal trust, the kind that a friend extends when you steer their decision about their own mouth. And by this point, that trust had already really been tested. First, that infection. Then he lost the tooth, and now this? Well, I still opened with it straight. I told him there had been a challenge, that the doctor would be calling him, but I really wanted to speak with him first. I wanted him to hear it from me. There was silence on the phone. And in that silence, guys, I did what I'd learned to do over 40 years of making hard calls. I stayed. I didn't rush to fill that quiet. I didn't over-explain. I just made sure he knew I was there, by his side. Not in a harsh, but in a very direct way. In a way that owned the problem, that I held it with him. You see, I owned the error, even though I didn't make it. Really think about that for a second. I didn't place that implant. That surgical decision was ultimately the doctor's. But the moment I referred this man, the moment I said I could fix your smile, I put my name on the outcome. Not the fault, the responsibility. And those two things are so vastly different. One you earn by making the mistake. The other you earn by being the person who made the promise. So I held it. And guys, after that silence, he said something that I still think about. He said, "John, I trust you." I told him that a poor client would not do what this doctor was willing to do. To really accept the challenge, to own their part of it, to go back and make it right. But I told him specifically I was going to see it through. So the second implant was placed, it was positioned correctly, the restoration was built, seated beautifully. My friend then had the smile that honors what I told him I could give him. And today, many years later, all is well. He's really more dentally aware than he ever was, more specific about outcomes, and I'm fairly confident he will never, ever take dental advice from anybody that has a few drinks on the golf course. But here's the thing I need you to understand about this story. I promised myself I would not stick my nose in a friend's smile again, and I really mean that. But truthfully, I know that if that same situation presented itself, the same case, the same chain of events, the same hard calls, I'd do it the same way, every single time. Because the path was right, even when the circumstances were brutal. And that's what this episode is really about. So that story isn't about a crown or an implant or the $6,000 I'm never getting back. It's about what happens when you decide that your name on a case actually means something. Not your name on the label on the box, your name on the actual outcome. There's a difference between a technician who fills a prescription and a technician who actually owns the case. I've said that before on this show, but today I want to go one level deeper because the golf story shows you something that a clean principle statement just doesn't. Owning a case sometimes means owning what isn't yours. Not the fault, the actual responsibility. You see, most technicians, when something goes wrong, the first instinct is to locate that one variable that isn't theirs. The impression was bad, the bite was off, the surgeon didn't go deep enough, the assistant gave that patient a wax try-in. And you know what? Most of those cases, the assessment is factually correct. The impression was bad. The bite certainly was off. The surgeon did not have optimal outcomes. But here's the thing about being factually correct when someone is hurting. Well, it doesn't help anybody. What helps somebody, what actually moves the situation towards resolution is when the person they've trusted most steps into the problem instead of stepping away from it. When they say something like, "Hey, I see this. I'm holding it with you. Here's what we're going to do to fix it." Guys, that's not weakness. That's the highest form of authority. And I want to say something to the younger technicians listening to this because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, if I own things that aren't my fault, I'll get eaten alive. Clients will take advantage of me. I'll spend my whole career absorbing other people's problems. I hear that. I've lived that fear. But there's a difference between absorbing chaos and leading through it. Absorbing chaos is silent. It's you grinding premium teeth to fit a bad record, not saying a word. It's you sending the case out and hoping rather than knowing. That's not ownership. That's avoidance wearing a mask of professionalism. Leading through it is the call, that honest conversation, the moment where you say what you see, what needs to be held, and steer the outcome toward the only direction that actually serves the patient. The client in my friend's case didn't have to take that implant out. They could have found a way to make something that was technically a restoration and call it done. Another lab would have done it, and I've seen it happen more times than not. I've seen technicians build around impossible situations because the alternative, that conversation that was way too uncomfortable to have is harder than maybe saying no. But a poor client would not be doing what this doctor was willing to do. And that sentence right there, guys, that's the filter. That's how you identify a real partner. Real partners want the truth. They lean into it. When things go wrong, and things go wrong in this trade, they always will. Inevitably, it happens. But real partners, they don't look for someone to absorb the blame. They look for the path back to the right outcome. And the way you find those partners, the only way, is being the person who tells the truth first. Now let me shift gears, because this episode isn't about one hard telephone call. It's about how communication in this trade is really evolving, and how the technicians who actually understand that evolution are the ones who are going to be relevant in what's coming. I've been known as this CAD specialist for a long time now. That just means I get referrals on cases, on difficult cases from all over this country, really challenging cases that may have had, less than ideal surgical outcomes, cases that other labs have already touched and maybe couldn't solve. Clients who found me because somebody told them that, hey, John might see something that others didn't. And I want to be clear about something. My relevance in these most difficult cases had nothing to do with the software that I use, nothing to do with my mill, my materials, my design libraries. My relevance is my voice. It took years to get here, years of building that kind of trust where my input isn't really up for debate. where the question isn't whether I have a perspective on the case, it's, hey, when are we going to talk about it? The teams I work with today expect that from me. And if a relationship develops where that's not welcomed, well, that relationship really doesn't continue. And guys, that's not arrogance, that's alignment. Because real partners lean in. The wrong ones, well, they just drift away. But I want to be honest about what that actually means in practice. Because there is a version of this that sounds like I just walked in one day, declared myself the expert, and everybody just nodded. But that's not how it works. That's not how it ever works. So the authority came from the calls, the ones that were uncomfortable, the ones where I said the hard thing early and the clinician pushed back and I still held my ground because the case actually required it. The ones where I flagged a concern early, but I turned out to be wrong, and I own that too. The ones where I picked up the phone when staying quiet would have been way easier and faster, and maybe nobody would even have known the difference. Every one of those calls built something. Not really reputation exactly, though that came as well. Something more internal than that. I like to look at it as a clarity about my own value, a confidence that what I see is worth saying, a willingness to be the person who speaks before the problem, not after it. And here's what happened when that confidence was established. Guys, the conversations changed. I started getting a different type of call. Not that defensive call, not the complaint call, the collaborative one that says, hey, John, what do you think we can do here? Walk me through what you're seeing. What would you do differently? That shift from the lab just being the place that fills the prescriptions to the lab who's now the voice in the room. Well, that didn't come from a new piece of equipment. It came from me showing up constantly, consistently, with the truth, delivered with enough ownership and enough humility that the people on the other end started to trust it. That's the path. It's not fast, but really, nothing really is in this trade. But here's what's changed over the years, and it matters for this episode. You see, I have clients all over this country. Many of them I've never met in person. They send the scans through the portal, they box up cases and ship them across the country because they've embraced me. The work, the perspective, my ownership, without ever sitting across the table from me. So the phone call, as powerful as it is, isn't always the right tool anymore. Not because the relationship is any less important, because that relationship has to survive across time zones, across packed schedules, across national practices that don't run on the same assumption that both parties are ever going to be available at the same moment. That's when my communication had to evolve. The first shift was to voice text. And I know what you're thinking. Texting is texting. Most of us do it. But there's a difference between a typed text and a voice text. And I want that to sit with you for a moment. You see, when I voice text a client, they hear me. Not just my words on a screen, they hear me. The tone, the pacing, the way I say something matters almost as much as what I say. A typed text that reads, hey, I have a concern about this case can land 20 different ways depending on the reader's mood, their day, their history with labs. A voice text with the exact same words, in my voice, my intention, my warmth behind it, lands once, the way I meant it. I want my clients to hear me. I want them to develop that connection, that friendship, that sense that there's a real human being on the other end of this portal who generally is invested in their outcomes. Voice text controls my time as well. I record it when I have a thought. They receive it when they have the moment. But it connects at a level that typed words simply can never reach. The second shift, and this one really changed things in a manner that I didn't fully anticipate. It's voiceover video attached as an addendum to the RX form. Think about this. The old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, a video has many more thousands of pictures. When I record a voiceover video as an addendum to the RX form, walking through what I see on the scan, pointing out the design constraints, discussing options, sharing a concern. Well, I'm not just communicating, I'm really showing my value. I'm demonstrating the wisdom with intention. I'm giving the clinician a chance to see what I see in real time and with my reasoning attached to it. And here's what makes it more than just communication. Well, guys, it's traceable, it's trackable. When I have a flag concern on a video and a client chooses a different path, well, that record exists. It's not as a weapon. It's not waiting for me to say, I told you so. But it's the foundation of maybe the next conversation. When that case comes back and we need to problem solve it together, we both know what was said, what was seen, and what was offered. The truth is already in the record. Guys, that's not just communication. That's stewardship. So let me give you a practical framework because I promised you a tool in this episode. And I don't want you to leave with just a philosophy when I can maybe give you something you can use on Monday. 3 mediums, 1 intention. The intention is always the same. Make sure what you know gets heard. The voice call is for moments that require a human on both ends of the line. The hard truth. The case that needs to be reset. The client who's frustrated needs to feel that someone is holding the problem with them. The relationship moment. The turning point. Guys, I don't think you voice call to deliver information. You voice call to deliver yourself. When a client needs to hear that an implant is in the wrong position, or that a case needs to come back, or that the path that they've chosen carries a risk that maybe I'm not very comfortable with. The conversation happens with voices, not text, not email, not a note in the portal. The reason is simple. Silence is expensive, and typed words create silence in the spaces between them. A voice call fills those spaces with humanity. The call structure is still the same as I described it in episode 9 or 10. You start being on the same side. You name what you see. You offer options. You protect the outcome. You own the case. That hasn't changed. What has changed is the frequency in which I need to use it today. Because the clients I work with today have already internalized the process. The hard calls are rarer because the foundation has been built. But when they're needed, guys, nothing replaces them. Voice text is for the daily connection, the running conversations of a case as it moves through the lab, a quick observation, a shade note, a design question, something I want on the record but doesn't warrant pulling both parties to the phone at the same moment. The key is this. If you're going to text a client, use your voice. Not because typed text is wrong, but because your voice carries what typed text cannot. It carries investment. It carries care. And for clients who have never met you in person, who you know only through the portals and the shipping labels and the finished cases, your voice is the relationship. Use it. Voice over video, as an addendum to the RX, is for clinical communication that needs to be seen. This is where I walk through a case, I show my screen, I point to the constraint, I present options, I explain my reasoning. It lives attached to the case as a permanent record. It's not a phone call they have to take right now. It's a conversation they can receive on their schedule. They can review it more than once and reference it later. These are for the cases that carry risks, the compromised surgical outcomes, the design constraints that limits aesthetics, the implant that has a very specific question. This is the medium that protects everybody. It's not just used to cover your own ass. To align everybody. So here's the principle for episode 15. The most powerful tool in the lab is your voice. It's not your mill, it's not your scanner, not the design software, not the material library, your voice. the accumulated wisdom behind it, and the truth that it carries. The relationship it builds every time it shows up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. And I want to connect this to something I said back in episode 1 because it's been sitting underneath this entire series. Your outcome follows intention, and intention follows understanding. Understanding only travels one way. It travels through communication. If the understanding lives only in you, if the only place your 40 years of pattern recognition exists is behind your eyes and in your hands, well, then the day you stop working is the day it disappears. And worse, the cases you're working on right now are not benefiting from what you know actually, because you haven't found a way to make it be heard. Now, here's the part I want you to sit with, because I think it's the most honest thing I can say in this episode. This trade is full of introverts, and I mean that with complete respect. Some of the most extraordinary technicians I've ever known are the people who chose the bench over the boardroom for a very specific reason. The work is internal. It demands a focused, quiet kind of attention that not everyone can sustain. I think it rewards the person that can sit alone for 3 hours and see things that nobody else would have seen. That's a gift. But the same gift left uncommunicated is a liability. Because what the introvert sees, that special thing that they spot on a scan long before anybody else had, that constraint they identified before anybody knew it was there, the option nobody offered because nobody looked close enough. None of that helps the patient if it stays at the bench. I've watched technicians with great hands, amazing talent, operate in complete silence. And then look at them and wonder why they only got these commodity-style cases. Why clients just treated them like a vendor. Why nobody called them before cutting a tooth. And the answer every single time was the same. They just hadn't shown anyone what they were capable of seeing. They kept it internal. They let the work speak for itself, and the work, as good as it was, it can't speak loudly enough on its own. The 3 mediums I described in this episode were not designed for the extrovert who loves confrontation. They were designed for exactly the person I just described. The voice text you record when the thought is clear on your schedule, when no one's waiting on the other end in real time. The video you attach to the RX with the case in front of you and the words that come naturally because you're looking at the things you're describing. The phone call you make when you're ready, with the facts in front of you and the intention clear. You control the narrative. You set the pace. You don't have to walk into the room unprepared or respond in real time when you're not in the right headspace. What you do have to do, the one non-negotiable, is show up. The introvert's power is precision. You get to see things clearly. You hold them carefully. You build with intention that most people can't match. But that precision has to have an outlet. It has to find a way into the conversation. Because the truth locked inside a quiet technician helps no one. The truth spoken, even imperfectly, even briefly, even in a voice text recorded in a car between pickups, that truth changes cases. It changes relationships. It changes how the trade sees you. And over time, it changes how you see yourself. So I've been talking about communication in the context of cases and clients. But I want to zoom out for a moment because there's a bigger why under all of this that I don't think gets said enough. Let me be direct about the state of this trade right now because it matters, and I'm not interested in pretending otherwise. You know, the fee-for-service clinician who actually wants a true laboratory partner, who wants the expertise, the ownership, the voice in the room, that is a smaller segment than it was 10 years ago. In-office milling is taking work. Insurance pressures is compressing margins across the industry. Consolidation is changing who makes the decisions and how. The commodity side of this trade is not going away. It's accelerating. I'm not telling you this to be discouraging. I'm telling you this because the response to it matters enormously. You cannot win the commodity competition. You don't have the infrastructure for it. You don't have the volume for it. And honestly, I'd like to believe you don't have the soul for it. Because nobody who has been listening to this show since episode 1 got into this trade to produce at scale without meaning. So the question becomes, and this is the question every independent laboratory needs to be sitting on right now. Why should they choose you? Not what is your price? Why should they choose to be with you rather than the portal that promises next day turnarounds and lower numbers on the invoice? The answer is your voice. The answer is the call you make before they cut a tooth. The answer is the video attached to the RX that shows them you saw something they didn't. The answer is the relationship they can't replicate with a portal. The friendship, the ownership, the trust built case by case over years of showing up with the truth. That's not a marketing strategy. That's a survival argument. You win by being irreplaceable. And irreplaceable is not a technical designation. It's a relationship designation. The technician who fills prescriptions efficiently is replaceable. The technician whose voice is embedded in the clinical record before anyone touches the patient, that person is not. The technician who isolates themselves from communication, who hides behind the bench, who lets the case speak for itself, who never makes the call, isn't just limiting their business. They're making themselves invisible in a market that's going to sort very aggressively between the visible and the invisible. Communicate. Show your worth. Let them hear what you know. That's not arrogance, that's survival. I've watched it happen. Brilliant technicians, extraordinary craftspeople, hands that could produce things that would stop you dead in your tracks. And they stayed invisible. They stayed quiet. And the world slowly built around them in a way that didn't include their voice because they never offered it up. That's a loss. Not just for them, for the clinicians who never got to work with a real partner, for the patients who never got the benefit of the expertise showing up before it was too late to change the direction, for the younger technician who needed to see what this trade looks like when the craft and the communication are working together. The reason this show exists, the reason I've been sitting in front of this microphone sharing 40 years of mistakes and hard-earned lessons, is because a rising tide lifts all ships. Some wise man told me that once before, and this trade needs to be lifted, not just technically, not just digitally, in the space between what a technician knows and what a clinician might hear. The space where patients win or lose, the space where relationships are built or abandoned, the space where the craft either survives or fade into a set of CAD files no one remembers how to question. Fill the space with your voice, not perfectly, not confidently at first, not with a script you've rehearsed and a framework you've memorized, just truthfully. Start with what you see, name the risk, offer the option, own the case. The rest builds from there. I know this. It built it for me, case by case, call by call, one hard conversation at a time, until the hard conversations weren't hard anymore. They were just how I work. And if you're sitting in your own version of your furnace right now, and if you got a case in front of you that needs a call that you haven't made, I want you to know something. The call is cheaper than the silence every time. The math always works out that way. So here's where we are. Episode 15 is the episode I owed you since episode 9. I called it the phone call framework. The real version, the lived version, not the clean theoretical version, is what this was always going to be about. But it turned into something more than that. And I think that's right, because the framework matters less than the intention underneath it. The medium matters less than the voice, and the voice matters less than the truth it's willing to carry. The 3 things I want you to leave with today. First, own the outcome, not just the craft, not just the steps you control, the outcome. Your name is on the case the moment you accept it. Lead it accordingly. Second, use your voice. All 3 mediums I shared today, the call, the voice text, the video record, they're all tools to make sure what you know gets heard. The introvert in this trade is not at a disadvantage. The introvert with 40 years of pattern recognition and the courage to share it is the most dangerous person in the room. Third, the truth is good. The clients worth keeping already know it. And the ones who don't, the ones who want flexibility without structure, speed without standards, labor without partnership, they were never going to be your people anyway. Let them find their way to somebody else. Stand tall for the right reasons and watch what comes back to you. I got things still ahead on this show that I'm excited about. We're going to talk about materials as a risk profile. Not a menu, but a real risk profile, because every material decision is a consequence decision, and most people in this trade are still treating it like a menu. We're going to talk about the cases I take on and the cases that I turn down, because earning the word no is its own education. And somehow there are a vast amount of technicians in this trade who still think they need permission to use that word. And eventually I'm going to bring in other voices into this conversation. People who've earned their own wisdom. People who sat in their own furnace and came out with something real to share. But today, here's what I want to leave you with. The most powerful tool in your lab has never lived on your bench. It's never lived in the software. It's never lived in the mill. It lives in the space between what you know and what the person across from you needs to hear. Because silence doesn't just cost cases. It costs the life you're trying to build around them. Fill that space. Thank you for listening to episode 15 of Margins and Meaning. If this show has value to you, share it with one technician, one clinician who still cares about doing things the right way. This has been John Wilson for Margins and Meaning, and remember, protect your margins, protect your meaning. Thank you.